Welcome, you're watching Kaleidoscope Srilanka Live News Capsule. Sri Lanka swore in her 9th executive president and first female prime minister in 24 years this week. As President Anura Kumara Dissanayaka takes over a nation that has had unprecedented economic and social woes, no one would deny that his plate is full, but he would have to prioritize his focus. Spelling these out is Professor Shanta Devarajan, Professor of the Practice of International Development at Georgetown University, USA, whom I caught up with on Zoom. Shanta, Sri Lanka is in a new era with a new president. What do you think are the priorities he should focus on at this time?
Well, I think the priorities for any president of Sri Lanka at this time, regardless of which one was elected, has to be to revive economic growth in the country. The country has come through a very painful process of stabilization. As you know, inflation hit 70%. There was shortages of food and medicine and fuel, and reserves were depleted, which is why Sri Lanka had to default on its loans. Now, what they have achieved in the last 2 years is stabilize that economy. So inflation has come down, reserves have been built up, and now you do find food and fuel and medicines you can buy them in the market. But the problem is that the economy is still not growing very rapidly. In fact, we've had negative growth for 2 years, 2022 and 2023, and it's only in the last 4 quarters has there been positive growth. And so I think the highest priority has to be to generate rapid economic growth over the medium term, over the next 5 to 10 years. And the focus of not just the president, but the administration has to be on those policies that are going to create economic growth. Now, what are those policies? Well, it's very clear that the most important thing is to open up the economy to foreign trade. Sri Lanka did open up the economy to foreign trade back in 1979, and the place just boomed. The economy just took off. And you know, the garment sector, tourism, agriculture, everything was launched. But in the last 10 to 15 years, pretty much under since the Rajapaksas were in charge, the economy has become increasingly closed. They've been restricting foreign trade and putting restrictions on imports and things like that. And that has choked the economy, and growth has been very slow. So I think we need to have a second wave of trade reform, opening up the economy to trade, to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit of the Sri Lankan entrepreneurs and enable this economy to grow. Now, maybe more specifically, I would say that there are at least two other items on the agenda that are unfinished from the previous administration, but they're part of the reform program that I would attach very high importance to. One is the reform of the state-owned enterprises. One of the reasons why we've had such lackluster growth is that Sri Lanka has these state-owned enterprises, most notably the Sri Lankan Airlines, but then there are a few others I'll mention, which are really depleting the treasury. I mean, the debt of Sri Lankan Airlines alone is 1% of GDP. Think about that. I mean, we've had about 1% of GDP growth. That's the magnitude of Sri Lankan Airlines debt. So we have to stop these state-owned enterprises bleeding the treasury every which way possible. Plus, they're not very efficient, so they're not really creating jobs, or they're not creating economic activity in the economy. The other two big state-owned enterprises that need reform, not necessarily privatization, are the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation and the CEB, the Ceylon Electricity Board. And there are a few others like that need reform. So these are the very high priority reforms. And then finally, the other what I would attach a high priority to is tax reform. Sri Lanka still has a very low tax to GDP ratio. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we had this crisis back in 2022, was that the previous government, now 2 governments ago, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa government cut taxes, so much so that Sri Lanka's tax to GDP ratio fell to about 8% of GDP. And that caused the fiscal deficit to balloon, and that's what led to the hyperinflation and things like that, and the depletion of reserves. Now, they've slowly started building up the tax to GDP, the tax revenues. I think tax to GDP ratio now is about 9 point something, but we need to get it much higher than that. I mean, comparable countries have tax to GDP ratios of 15% or 16%. And Sri Lanka used to have a tax to GDP ratio close to 20%. So we can do it. It's just a question of being able to put through the tax reforms. And when I say tax reform, I don't mean taxing the poor or the middle class. It's taxing the rich. The rich get away with paying very little taxes in the country. And I think we can move towards something like a wealth tax or a tax on housing. That would be one way of capturing some of that huge wealth that you just driving around Colombo, you see all of that wealth, and then you think, these people aren't paying any taxes on all that wealth. That really is very troubling, because the lack of taxation, the lack of tax revenues means that there isn't enough money to pay for some of the public services that the poor need, like health or education or social transfers and things like that.
What pitfalls should he be aware of?
That's a hard one, because the pitfall, usually the pitfall is the political reaction, as we saw with the Aragalaya movement and things like that. That the Sri Lankan public has shown that if you make mistakes, they will punish you for it. The Rajapaksa administration found that out rather brutally. So I think the new president will have to make sure that they manage the economy prudently, so that we don't fall into these huge fiscal deficits, huge current account deficits that then lead to the austerity programs that then people get very upset about. So it has to be done in a measured way. I'd say the one thing, during an election campaign, every candidate, not just AKD, every candidate promises the sun and the moon. I will lower taxes for you, I will lower prices and things like that. The fact is, we can't lower something, we can't increase a subsidy unless we have a way of paying for it. And that has to be the mantra of this administration as well. If you try to keep a campaign promise without worrying about how you're going to finance it, you run into trouble very quickly. And that's the pitfall that we have to avoid. I think it is possible to lower taxes to the poor and the middle class, or increase services to the poor and the middle class. But we have to do it in a fiscally prudent way. And that's why I want to raise taxes on the rich, so that you can actually finance these programs.
Thank you. I think you've done a brilliant job. Fabulous.
Sorry?
All done. Thank you so much.
All done. Oh,
yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. That was quick.
Thank you. Yeah, that's quick. So thank
All
you
right,
so much.
good.
Did you know Kaleidoscope is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn? Don't forget to subscribe, follow and like us for more.
You focus on your goals. We will take care of the risks. Srilanka Life.